Hey everyone. I thought I'd share a tip with you about definition in the human design chart. Because even though this is sometimes something that gets discussed in readings, it's not something that gets called out specifically and identified specifically. Sometimes it's just a little aspect of your experience that gets woven in, or it's not super critical to the story. Every chart reading is different, and so sometimes it doesn't get touched on really at all because there are other important themes and messages that are there. So, definition, what is that? Well, when you look at your chart and you look at all the keynotes, the definition is basically just the way that the colored in parts of your chart are arranged. And so if we think of your human design chart as a circuit board, there are going to be parts that are defined, and that means they're colored in, and specifically the larger centers in the chart. If those are defined, if they're colored in, then those are either all going to be connected by the gates and channels, which are those other lines in the chart, or they're going to be broken up and disconnected and separated by essentially undefined or white gates or channels. And so it's a marker that points to us about the energy flow in the chart and the energy flow in you. And it's valuable because it helps us to understand our particular relationship to conditioning. So if you're a reflector, you have no definition. And so there's that. That's an outlier. But if you have single definition, for example, then let's say in your human design chart you just have the solar plexus and the throat defined. Well, they're going to be connected in with a channel. That single definition. There's no break in the circuitry there. Or let's say you've got the solar plexus, the throat, and the identity center defined. They're all connected. You can follow lines that will trace you from one to the other. And so there's a consistent energy flow. So with single definition, it's said that there's no real energetic need, no need for the other. And that is something that we see as being true for all other types of definition because there is an archetype, a gate, and everyone else who has some other, a definition other than single definition that is like a magnet. It's like this pulling force in your chart or in your energy in your body that's pulling for that archetype from relationship, from other people. It's pulling that sort of conditioning in. So with single definition, that's not happening. And so it's like the story is just start to finish. It's A to Z. It's a closed circuit. It's a nice complete flow of energy. So then following that we have a simple split. And so this is when you in your chart have one single gate, just one gate that would bridge the circuit. So you have two distinct and separated areas of definition in your chart. And it's a simple little split that would connect the two areas of definition. And so that one gate that would bridge the gap is typically the area in your life where you are the most conditioned. And so it's so enlightening to be aware of that gate and that experience. What is that gate? Really look at whatever that simple split is for you. Sometimes it can be more than one gate, but it's just going to be like, for example, maybe it would be um, 46 and 16 that would, if either one of them was defined, would connect both of the separated defined chunks in your chart. Um, but it would be that aspect of your life that is the most vulnerable to conditioning. So if you have gate 46 as the gate that would bridge your simple split, then maybe you're super obsessed, hyper focused on the aspect of life that is gate 46. Maybe you're very conditioned, carrying around the shadow of gate 46. Maybe you feel like you're, overcompensating in that way, trying to make up for what feels like a lack or a need. So that is why for the simple split, it's really helpful to be aware of whatever that gate is. Now, if you have a wide split, this also means that you have two distinct and separate areas of definition in your chart. However, it's more than just a single gate that would bridge the gap. Sometimes it's a whole channel. Sometimes it's a channel and a center and a gate, and it's a whole group of things sometimes. So, a wide split, you are most vulnerable to the conditioning in your undefined centers. Any center in your chart that's undefined, you are most vulnerable to the conditioning there. And so that sometimes can be several undefined centers. And so that's really important to look at. And speaking for myself and my experience, that's been the case for me. I have a wide split. And so there's a lot of unpacking and pain and, vulnerability, but also potential for wisdom in those undefined centers. Now, if you have a triple split, this means you have three distinct and separate areas of definition in your chart that are separated. And it is also the case for the triple split that the undefined centers are most vulnerable to conditioning. So, for example, if you're a triple split and you have the undefined ego, which is pretty common, it's the majority of us that do, then your sense of self worth, your sense of motivation, your willpower, how competitive you are, how arrogant you may or may not be, what you feel like you're trying to prove in life, feeling like you have to try to prove something, your intelligence, your worthiness, your lovability. Those are things you might really need to look at because that's where you're most vulnerable to the conditioning. And the last type of definition is the quadruple split. So this means that there are, you guessed it, four distinct and separate parts in your chart of definition that are broken apart. And so for this type of definition, it's those single gates. We go back to the single gates that would bridge the gaps as being the most vulnerable to conditioning. So for the quadruple split, you'll want to look at those gates again for the particular areas of conditioning. And it can be so freeing to know this, to look at the definition in your human design chart, to look at those particular gates, those particular centers, and work on releasing it. Give yourself permission to let that go, to maybe not focus on it, to heal the shadow, to maybe not obsess about it, to maybe not feel like you're missing out on anything. But again, those of us that don't have single definition, we are pulling in the conditioning of the world to ourselves in those centers or in those gates. We are trying to learn about ourselves and about others and about life through those vulnerabilities in our chart. So there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing bad if you're carrying around shadows of those gates and those centers. You've just pulled in the conditioning. Your it's like your soul is wanting to learn that lesson. It's wanting the conditioning, wanting the shadow. But seeing it, being aware of it is where the process really begins. That's where the journey really begins. So hopefully that sort of perspective and that sort of explanation is helpful. I certainly have found it helpful for myself, and for my clients, in reading human design charts. Like I said, this isn't something that always comes up. It's mostly just kind of woven into the story, basically. So, if you're curious and we have a session together, this is something you can bring up and we can talk about how this might impact your experience because definition certainly is important. So, hopefully that's helpful. If you continue to study on your own, then I would highly recommend looking at this sort of thing for yourself, checking out your undefined centers, what aspect of life those involve, what life experiences those involve, and the gates as well. So enjoy. Good luck.